from Surat to Kanyakumari, and it covers almost 160,000 square kilometer, an average of 1200 meters. Interestingly, if you look at, it is a source of 60 rivers. Very interesting. So including Kaveri, Krishna, most of the South Indian rivers origin from this Western Ghats provides water and almost 40% of India. And also not only provides water for things, also it forms catchment area complex, many drainage system, many agricultural activities, depends on Western Ghats. And based on this has been declared as a World Heritage Site recently. And such a wonderful forests have also a very high species diversity and endemism. So if you look at the area covers less than 5% of Indian landscape, but have more than 30% Indian species. So that itself shows that how rich a ecosystem a mountain range. Look at the species which is present here. If you look at here, almost 50% of the plant species present are endemic. Similarly, reptiles, amphibians, more than 50% of the species present nowhere else except Western Ghats. So this is also considered one of the world biodiversity hotspot. In fact, it has been considered as one of the hottest biodiversity hotspot. Means among the 20 hotspot biodiversity, this is one of the most richest biodiversity present in even the world. It is narrow range, but so much species present. Such a wonderful place been under severe threat of various activities. Like if you look at 1850s, when British colonizer started opening up Palghar Gap for transportation of large-scale deforestation, and between Tamil Nadu and Kerala, that is the first they worked on. Later on, it continued almost 50 years. Almost that clear felling continued even after independence, and many forests landscape have been converted into dams, settlement, plantation, roads, and including plantation like tea, coffee, rubber, oil, all those things. They thought rainforest is useless forest, and the British found that such a useless forest not required, and they clear felled and planted all kind of crop species. Not only that, following these activities, human settlement, mining, dam, road, all those things happen. Interestingly, inefficient land use practices. So indiscriminate clear felling. They have no idea which place to cut, which place to be kept reserve, which place to be for development activity. There is no such a plan was not happened, but simply they go on, cut and clear felled. Now with this, we find almost 50 million people live in hotspot overall at the density of 260 people per square kilometer. Is one of the highest number. Although we say one of the hotspot of biodiversity area, but we find so many people live in this, say, the forest. In fact, inter-Western Ghats. This all contributed substantial loss of fragmentation of forest throughout the entire range. So that's a very severe. The effect to the forest. The loss is very, very serious. Almost 1/3 of entire Western Ghats we have lost. That is between 1920 and 2023 and 2013, where you look at here map, you find the loss is basically more southern part and Kerala part, where huge forest cover have been lost to this kind of activities. Especially we lost the forest conversion of almost, if you look at plantation, 50% of forest we lost to plantation, almost 24% of for agriculture and other activities. So we lost almost this much square kilometer area, basically plantation, agriculture, and other habitat type. that led to loss of this much forest. What kind of forest we lost? Almost one third of wet evergreen forest is called rainforest. Throughout year, there's a evergreen forest. We lost 30%, and we lost 25% of moist deciduous forest and remaining, deciduous forest. So much forest we lost. Today, we have almost approximately less than 20% of original forest cover remains. As you can say, pristine state. The originally how 150, 200 years ago, what was there, you find only 20%. The two is not a continuous forest patch anywhere, but it is yeah, less than 4 places you find that too only 200 square kilometers, one biggest forest patches you can find. Otherwise, there is no such a 1600 kilometer length, only 4 places you find a large forest patches. And during the process time also, the number of forest patches also increases. And it increases more and more as more open up, more degradation happens, and the mean patch size also decline drastically, increase drastically. And such activities led to severely fragmented Western Ghats across the globe. What happens if severely fragmented? Now, how fragmented happens? If you look at here, basically, the process of large expanse habitats transformed into smaller patches, and it leads to here one continuous forest patches. When you open up for various activities, it leads to isolation of small forest patches. Not only that, the matrix between the forest patch also drastically changes, is inhospitable for many species which originally they're living. For example, the forest patch where you have tea plantation, where an animal, arboreal mammal cannot move between forest patches, because although there's a forest around, there's some habitation is there, but that cannot move between forest patches. Overall, when fragmentation happens, we lose original habitat and increase forest patches and decrease mean patch size, and also mean patch isolation. More and more forest patches are isolating themselves over a period of time. So it has moving. Yeah. So how will happen? So the fragmentation overall is known to have severe impact on existing species. IUCN IUCN mentioned almost more than 50% of species threatened with because of only forest fragmentation. The major reason for fragmentation. That's a thing overall globally. So it's very important to understand how a fragmentation is happening in any ecosystem. So if you look at how a fragmentation affecting a species, once continuous forest patches fragmented into many small forest patches, what are things happens immediately? Immediately happen isolation of small populations. Once continuous forest patches has been isolated, this isolated population have susceptible various extinction processes. For example, simplest example is demographic changes. For example, a small isolated population has only one male. Death of a male is almost detrimental to entire population survival future. Or continuous birth of a female, there's no male, or vice versa. What happens? The entire population goes extinction. So that's a demographic changes, environmental, non-available resource. All those things are going to happen in isolated population. Animal will live there. Sometimes, many times, even genetic randomness is going to affect the deleterious genes can accumulate, that will have an issue on survival of the species. This is short term, immediately what happened when isolation happens following fragmentation. Whereas a long term, it has its own effect over a period of time, especially microclimate changes, the floral and faunal communities change over a period of time. So when this forest patch is exposed to sunlight, the more invasive species come into started living and have its own niche in the existing species. There's a lot of competition. When new species coming, they also bring diseases. A pathogen parasite can invade, and when, as I mentioned, when forest opened up for many activities, human, cattle, domestic animals started moving in, and there's competition with a strict environment. So you have all kind of issues going to happen over a period of time. Initially, there is a short-term impact, then over a period of time, 5, 10, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, these are all going to come on the way, the survival of most of the endemic endangered species who live in the forest patches, including nutritional stress. Over a period of time, you have really have going to suffer with the resource availability because of a lot of other species competing like that. So there's a proposal by Fisher and Landmeyer how a species go extinct in an environment like this. It acts two-way by landscape modification. Under landscape modification, you have effects exogenous, where endogenous two factors going to affect. One is like a physical characteristic of habitat, and endogenous, like you have a species who present there, they are going to change their own survival. So you have both exogenous, endogenous. We are going to affect the species survival. Same time, you're going to have other random effects of stochastic effect going to affect over a period of time, the rainfall, other drought, other thing going to affect. Yeah. So over a period of time, this both exogenous, endogenous, landscape, and stochastic effect going to affect is population decline in a population where living in endangered habitats like this.
Excuse me, Dr. Umapati, can I interfere?
Yeah.
I think so many people are not able to see the presentation. Can you once again share your presentation? I think I can see, but others could not see. That's what people are messaging me.
Okay, share. Go back once again. Start sharing.
Stop sharing, and then again you can start sharing.
Okay, I'll do it.
You have to pin the PPT, I think so. That's what people are telling.
Okay.
It was going fine for the first 20 minutes. Now it's fine.
You able to see me now?
Yes, good. Yeah, go ahead. Please go ahead.
As I mentioned that many species respond differently. Some of them more vulnerable, some of them are able to survive, like specialist species going to affect more, whereas generalist will be able to survive. Some species like arboreal species really going to suffer due to inhospitable matrix around the forest patches. Like this, you find a small forest patch, other places where you have surrounded by tea, coffee estates. So this with the background, we want to study this impact on this habitat fragmentation on Western Ghats, and we found Anamala Hills one of the ideal place to study, because you have all kind of information which one can look for habitat fragmentation present here. So you have an ideal place like Anamala Hills is an ideal place where you find all kind of forest patches, from evergreen forest to semi-evergreen forest, whole across you can find. And interestingly, you also have a lot of human activities where you have almost 7 lakh people live here inside the Anamala Hills here, especially this place where a lot of tea estate around. You have people live around 7 lakh people, And these people also know you have a lot of tea, coffee, cardamom estate surrounded by them. And these green patches are the forest patches which you find different sizes, and this has been clear filled from 1860 onwards till 1930. There was a lot of clear filling was happening like that. And you have forests isolated quite a different time period. This is called time since isolation. You have 60 years since, from 140 years, 150 years now, 160 years now. So you have a wide range of habitat size variability. You have small forest patches, large forest patches, less disturbance, high amount of disturbance, presence of human, absence of human, all kind of setup, kind of laboratory setup, kind of thing you can find. And we found this place very ideal to work on to understand how the impact of fragmentation happened this fragmented rainforest ecosystem. So we found a model area to study this one. So then we want, since I mentioned you previously, many species, species differ, no impact with reference to their habit, with reference to their behavioral. We thought urban mammal may be an ideal species to study how the species present, because as I mentioned, and that the forest discontinuity of canopy, definitely the most affected species would be arboreal mammals. So we thought we study first arboreal mammals. My colleagues study in terrestrial small mammals. I looked at on arboreal mammals. Arboreal mammals, the many of them, the endangered species like lion-tailed macaw, nilgal langur, Malabar giant squirrel, and other two flying squirrel called small truangur flying squirrel, large brown flying squirrel. So we took almost 25 forest patches which vary in the size and as I mentioned, habitat variability, all kind of setup we have. So we looked for the occurrence of species these forest patches. We found initially that the initial area was a major factor affecting their presence. Later on, we found that there are many factors influencing their presence. So our preliminary study showed initially lion-tailed macaque among all the 5 species. Lion-tailed macaque was the most affected species among the 5 species. So we thought we go on study in detail about lion-tailed macaque, their presence, the occurrence, all kind of thing as a model species. So many of you know lion-tailed macaque is an interesting species, one of the most endangered, critically endangered species as per IUCN, and you have around 3,500 adult lion-tailed macaque present at present. And very unfortunately, most of the population, almost 40% population, live with 10 to 50 individuals, and no single population have more than 250 individuals. That is a very unfortunate. So there's no single population, large population present where you can find a genetically viable population over a period of time. But many of population are 1 or 2 groups, and they're isolated quite some time, last 100, 150 years across Western Ghats. So this is the presence of the lion-tailed macaque, and similarly, their biology also very interesting among the lion-tailed macaque. They are completely arboreal mammals, except one forest place. You find lion-tailed macaque, Valpara, you can find them ground. Otherwise, you don't find anywhere the ground. And interestingly, the group structure also like a single male group, normally around 20 individuals, and it give birth throughout a year. And the female, another interesting factor is about it takes almost 6.5 years to give first time birth. It's unlikely in many primate species. Most of primate species give birth 3 to 4 years onwards, but lion-tailed macaque a lot of time. Another interesting species of lion-tailed macaque is very high interbirth interval between birth. Normally, in most of the mammalian species, it is less than a year, and here you find almost more than 2 points. Yes.
Yeah. Again, somebody is trying to open the presentation, I think, which could cause. I request all the participants not to try to share your presentation because now we could not see Dr. Umapathi's presentation. Somebody interrupted right now. Just a while ago. Can you again stop sharing and again start sharing?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Tappan Mandal. I think one
Okay.
participant named Tappan Mandal. He tried to present his slide, and because of that, there was an interruption. Yes, that's fine, Dr. Umapati.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, it's a very ideal species to study how the fragmentation happening and what are the process undergo species. And also, it's also interesting phenomenon that it lives on tree covered mostly and lives in rainforest, and they eat only fruits and mostly foods called frugivores. So this made us as an ideal species to study for
Again,
over here.
one second, Dr. Umapati.
Yeah.
One particular participant, Tappan Mandal, is repeatedly trying to present his thing. Can you just leave the meeting, please, Mr.
You
Tappan
can
Mandal?
stop. You can stop him.
Huh?
You can stop him now. Block him.
Please. Yes, Dr. Umapati, can you again start that?
Yeah.
I removed him from the meeting. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's good.
Yes, fine.
You can see now.
Fine, Umapati.
Yeah.
Sorry for that. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. So that made us to study a long term, and as I mentioned previously, we looked at the presence of the species, and we found only limited occurrences. What are the factors affected survival of the species? Well, I was telling you, you want to understand how the species present once forest patches are fragmented, and what factors affecting the presence of lentil macaw following fragmentation once isolation happens. So we looked at many factors, and one of them, like if you look at presence of occurrence of percentage occurrence of lentil macaw in the forest fragments. Mostly it occurs almost a large fragment which are more than 200 hectare area, and it declined further, and is forest patches almost up to 11 to 50. There are still lentil macaw present in this space. Whereas small fragment less than 11 hectare, you don't find them anymore in this forest space. That means areas some extent have a role to play presence initially in the particular locations. So what are other factors? As I mentioned, when you have large forest patches, small forest patches, almost 80%, almost all large, above 50 hectare, and when it's a small forest patches, you don't find much of them. Interestingly, you also find most of them, in this Western Ghats, many forest patches owned by private estate, coffee tea estates, where they have maintained some forest patches for resources, especially water resource and other things the people maintain like that. So there are also a lot of forest wild animals present there. And if you look at there, interestingly there once again, and the forest patch owned by government large have more persons of lentil macaw than forest patch owned by private and small numbers. So you have such a difference in presence because of area as well as ownership. Also, you can find what other factors you can influencing the presence of lentil macaw initially once you present. So you look at here tea density, especially tea density has very high in forest patches where lentil macaw present. Similarly, total basal area is actually a tree cover in a location. So the more basal area means more dense of forest or more big size trees are present. So these are all find very interesting. Interestingly, we found more on significantly high in where trees are more taller than more taller trees where lentil mucus percent more. This also gives an idea where the taller, bigger trees are more resourceful trees. So these all factors directly affected their survival of lentil mucus over a period of time. This we study around 2000 and 1997 to 2000. Although this fragmentation happened over a period of time, last 80, 70 years ago, but still forest, this forest patch, lentil mucus present, these factors majorly contributing to them. And we looked at once animals present, how the animals present in this lentil macaque this population, what are the factors, what are the changes it has to accommodate. Especially I looked at food habits, how animals live in these forest patches. If you look at animals in the small forest patches, eat less number of plant species. Otherwise, they eat almost 100 plus species in large forest patches, whereas animals live in small forest patches restricted to 30, 40 species. So they limited resource already. And also it eats less invertebrates as a protein, you need more protein for lentil macaque. Mostly they get from seeds, but whereas the small forest patch is a limited resource, so availability of invertebrate also very limited to small forest patches. So the animals living in small forests have lesser nutritional support. And we also looked at how overall pattern of behavioral changes. Animal has to adapt. I mentioned to you, animal has to adapt over a period of time to survival in the small restricted environment. Look at here, overall animals spend a lot of time, large, if you have large animal have go on eat more, whereas feeding time is very in small forest patches. That means the resource availability is very less. Whereas you look at ranging are looking for food, traveling, looking for food trees and all. Spend a lot of time small forest to look for food. So it has to go and travel over a period of time in a day, spend more time looking for food. That means resource availability is very clearly mentioning to us that the major problem in feeding their things. And we found overall a lot of aggression also because resource is limited, animal has to find each other the same food, and the competition happens like that. So more aggression also observed in small isolated forest patches like that. And we also looked at is there any other social behavior? Once animals are restricted, living in small isolated forest patches, although in natural forest, animal live in single male groups. When there is a two male, another male comes up, the group normally split, and the other male go to occupy other group like that. But when here the animal cannot move out from forest patches since it's completely isolated, they have to live with the same group because of they have to adjust. But they have to adjust with the same male over a period of a lot of negative interaction we find. Especially in small forest patches, we found a lot of fighting. In fact, a lot of infertility issues, especially one female comes for heat, but there are multi males present there. In the competition, the animal unable to mate the female properly, so there is a failure in success of reception. So you have multi male leads to, in fact, failure of reproduction. So this kind of observation we made. Yeah. So then we also looked at what are other factors influencing, as I mentioned, your reproductive failure because of multi-males and other issues. And we also looked at how these animals live in isolated environment with restricted resource and resources. So we looked at physiological stress. This was a study where we collected fecal sample, they examined and their actually their stress level to understand how one can really examine the physiological status. We found, in fact, interestingly, that animals in small fragment have a lot of stressful activities, as I previously showed graph where you find a lot of aggression you find here, and there's the same reflected in a stress level. So you find that the aggression leads to stress level. So many of you know that stress level definitely going to affect the reproductive system over a period of time. So you have behavioral, you have physiological. Yeah. There's a disturbance, somebody's talking. Yeah. So overall, we also found animals in small forest patches have also stressed due to both behavioral and physiological activities. So we want to look at how this affecting demography. Demography means finding out there and how many female, male, how many age, sex composition, birth rate, growth rate. We want to study entire forest patches where lentil are present. We looked at their group size. If you look at group size here, the left side and y-axis is a forest patch size, 20 square, 20 hectare, 200 hectare, 2000 hectare, like that. If you look at here, animals in small forest patches, the group size are very, highly variable because this animal cannot move out from the forest patch. So they have to survey same place. There are some forest patches where some matrix has a good vegetation that are able to support the population. They go on grow. One of the examples is Putotam forest patch where around 60 hectare have more than 150 individuals now. Because of the matrix, especially in Puthota, have a lot of human habitation, have a lot of other plantation which has helped the animal to grow beyond its carrying capacity. So some forest patches you have highly variable group size, where otherwise in a large fragments group size is very small size. Interestingly, we also found the birth rate. Birth rate is opposite. The lower birth rate we found in small forest fragments when compared to large forest patches. Similarly, percentage immature. Immature in a group is a very important, percentage immature in a group is very important factors deciding how healthy group is. More than 50% is known to have very healthy group and they are doing very well. So if you look at here, the small forest patch, you have a lot of small, highly variable. Also, you have less percentage immature percent compared to large forest patches. Similarly, we also found growth rate also low. Its growth rate is 1 year period of a group growing between January to December. How much a group is grown over a period of time per year. So when we look at growth rate also very low in forest patches. Overall, the group size, birth rate, immature person all impacted their survival of this lentil maca in the small forest patches. We also looked at, I was mentioning you, I've been working quite some time since 1994, 2000. Now recently we started another work, 18, now started analyzing data. We've been working quite some time. We also found, interestingly, that you have, when we studied 1994, the same trend followed, birth rate. 1994, what was the trend? The small fragment are low. Similarly, 2011 also the same. So it continued to happen now and more over a period of time. That means the trend is still prevailing after 10, 15 years, 20 years now. So, and in fact, the growth rate was the same, not much difference if you find over a period of time. The same trend when we studied 1994, now 2011, now 2020, we are also working on. The same trend is falling. That's why a population goes down over a period of time. Growth rate reduces, birth rate reduces, percentage matures decline. So all makes as population extinct locally. That's what I'm going to tell you at the end. And even I mentioned to you, the personal immature is very important. When you compare between two studies, 96 and 2011, once again, the same trend followed that it's declining further. What was we observed that time on the same trend, but even more difference we find now. So that means it's going negatively over a period of time. So now I studied the demography, we studied physiology, we studied ecological, we studied behavioral, we studied population growth rate, we studied. We want to know what still there are population declining, what other factors one can contribute like that. Still we found, as mentioned, percentage mature is very low in the forest fragment. What's the reason? That was still our question going on. Is there anything problem with the genetic setup? For this, we collected fecal sample. I don't want to go detail. Almost 8 forest patches. We collected fecal sample and more than 88 individual. Uh, these forest patches are, as I mentioned to you, no, ranges from 85 to 150 years old. So you have isolation uh, of almost 7 to 20 generations. So you have so many generations now. At least you can say at least 15, 20, 20 generation like undergone after fragmentation of this habitat. So you have the range of isolation, time since isolation you have. So we thought we should to study about this one because interestingly, almost 20% of lentil macaque in Western Ghats person and animal is around 1,000 individuals. You can say now 30% of individuals in a global population person only animal hills. So we want to study. For that, we want to use not only forest patches but also the study empathy where a neighboring continuous forest patches near Kerala side. So we want to study a control as a control to our fragmented population. How these two population their genetic setup. So we use a genetic marker to study their genetic changes over a period of time. So we studied here the population here in empathy, the control population. You can say this is anomaly hills. Look at here, nucleotide haplotype diversity here significantly very low. The fragmented forest patches. Similarly, nucleotide diversity, you see, look at here, very low. So essentially, our study shows that extremely low mitochondrial diversity in anomaly hills, indicating severely reduced gene flow and possibly inbreeding. So because as I mentioned you, almost 20-25 generations is almost a long period for a species which a single male or single female started the original founder population. So over a period of time, they get accumulated more and more homozygous population you find in these forest patches. That is a very interesting observation to really look at. And we want to look at how they are working on how they structure this population, not only anomaly hills, we want to study entire Western Ghats. Are they population are really doing well? But we found very interestingly the entire Western Ghats, they're a healthy population, they are very genetically very healthy and doing well. But we interestingly found the population structuring themselves. They are not a very uniform population across the Western Ghats. We want to know what is the reason structuring population. You find that populations are structuring among themselves. So they are not a very uniform population. So to find out, is there anything you have a different population structure? You know, I mentioned previously Western Ghats, so continuous forest patches, there's a gap between the gap, Balkat gap, 30-40 kilometer gap we have here. That separates the population from north and south. So the structuring is anything with reference to Balkat gap. So we looked at other markers and found out that in fact they are entirely different populations. In fact, genetically they are more different from northern part of Western Ghats, but southern part of Western Ghats. The divergence is almost 2.11 million years ago. So this is very interesting. We see that the Balkat gap is a recent one, but not only our study, other studies by Vidya and other people, Robin, previously mentioned that this gap is prehistoric gap. It's not recent one. So there is a discontinuity of gene pool between this population that made Lentil macaque north to south, two different population, the evolving population. Based on that, because 2.1 million is really very high for any species, so that we recommended the government to treat a separate two population whenever they keep breeding program, especially in Mysore and Thiruvananthapuram, Bangalore, other zoos. So that also to understand there are two different populations, not to mix up the population. So then, as I mentioned, so far we found how so far what we understood is the large forest fragments government won't really have impact on occurrence. Demographic study showed that birth and growth rate of decline over a period of time. Immature survival severely declined once again. Some population continuously declining. So this demography. Ecological, we found significant changes, food ecology and food availability. And genetic also showed that partially explained because we showed that there is a uh, decline, there is a significantly reduced genetic variability in the population, especially isolated population. So these are all things we looked at. And what other factors one still affecting their population decline? So we want to study anything invasive species, especially parasite pathogen may impact their survivability. Especially, I was telling you that personal immature is a major factor. When animals wean out after a year, and for first year to third year, that recruitment is not happening. Many of these small population, small forest patches and population. That means there is something impacting their survivability, especially young animals. Once the animals grown after 3, the survivability is very high. Our paper, other research paper showed. So the immature survivability is a very important factor for our understanding what are the other factors may be influencing. Especially, I mentioned to you, genetic is a major factor, resource is a major factor, but is there anything else affecting their immature survivability? If we understood, then definitely we are able to find real reason how a species go extinction in small population. So we want to study other major factor. One can really look at parasite pathogens. So when, as I mentioned previously, you have opened up the large forest patches for actually for various activities, the human, cattle, all came into Western Ghats, started living along the rainforest habitat, especially domestic animals. When you have invasive species started coming, cattle, human, all carry all kind of gastrointestinal parasites and other things. I looked at basically gastrointestinal parasite. Overall, before going to lentil macaque, I want to look at this big program which worked on almost 4,450 samples we studied over a period of time. 26 mammalian species we worked out, and 19 forest patches we studied in detail. And we found 38 parasite taxa, and hardly maybe one third, not even say 15 to maybe 12 to 15 species naturally occurring forest patches. Remaining almost all of them are from either come from domestic or human or other origin. There's no almost two-thirds of entire past extra which we recorded all come from human origin. That is really very dangerous to the animal. So now so many parasite invasion happening to that these forest patches which are isolated, where originally they never encountered such a an invasive parasite to come into lentil macaque, because lentil macaque dogs, all of them sharing sometimes same water resource. Okay, so and we interestingly look at 68% of all the fecal sample collected had at least one gastrointestinal parasite, and 64% have at least multiple gastrointestinal parasites. That means almost two-thirds of fecal sample collected have at least two parasites. That means every individual there present have at least this parasite load, means come from human, domestic, animal origin. Many of them come from like that. So we want to look at what are the factors influencing this one. So we looked at here human settlement, major factor. If you look at human presence, number of gastrointestinal parasites very high per group mean. Human absent very limited. Similarly here, percentage prevalence, human is presence, that particular forest patch near to the forest patch very high percentage prevalence and present the animal which have high amount of parasite. Similarly, look at the trend, the larger fragment size, lesser parasite prevalence, whereas small forest patch, most of small forest patches are nearby human settlement or nearby road, other connectivity or other domestic, other animal persons. So they are directly infecting these animals there where they're present. So actually the size of fragment and human settlement major factor affecting their gastrointestinal parasite invasive species. That was our main reason, main findings of this study. But you want to look at lentil macaque, comes back to lentil macaque alone once again. So as I mentioned, percentage immature is a really serious factor for us. What might influence them? So we in-depth study took for understanding how this is happening here. If you look at here, once again, 75% of all the 97 samples had at least one parasite. So we collected 91 samples for 9 forest fragments. We found 9 taxa in lentil macaque, and 5 of them like this, and 6 occurred almost only in human settlement. And these all 6, 5 of them are basically come from human or domestic animal origin. Only 3 occurred both, and 3 of which only 2 are basically from naturally occurring post-parasite presence in wild animals. Otherwise, here also once again, two-thirds of all the parasite species we recorded are because of human settlement, human domestic animal origin. So that shows that what species present have directly transmitting the parasite load to the endangered species, endemic species. As I mentioned there, basically endangered species, endemic species are more affected. So here in this case, you look at how this also translating to here. Look at human settlement once again, and here number of species. If human settlement present, you have a large number of species group here. More species you find here. Similarly, number of species per individual. Look at here. Once again, human settlement, more number of species here. Similarly, prevalence here. So prevalence directly related to the human settlement. If more the nearby forest patch in human settlement, there are more prevalence, more species per individual we found. That shows that directly, definitely that a human make this animal more susceptible for their survival. So you come back to the proposal where I presented how both exogenous, endogenous works. I look at here the left side, the graph, the cartoon where you can find both the landscape, all those happening, the endogenous which we studied. Together, it is along with the stochastic model, it is going to affect the overall the decline population. For example, one simple example I tell you, one of the forest patch we studied Pandimed where only 7 individuals was present almost 10 years. So only one male was there. If that male by chance hunted by a leopard or something, loss of a male, definitely no chance of survival of this population. So it has to recruit another male. It takes 10, 15 years to come back. By the time the female should be there. So a demographic stochastic changes, a single male death in a population leads to extinction of species in a particular place is possible. So both the extinction happen both habitat, environment, both animal biology, ecology, make animal to suffer and decline population and leads to extinction. As I mentioned here, we study demography, disease, genetic, ecological resource. So all multidimensional, along with stochastic environment variable, a drought and a flood or a disease outbreak can definitely make a local extinction possible in the forest patches. So we looked at and come to a conclusion. What are things I studied and how they came up with this one. As I mentioned, T density, canopy cover, total bacillary major factors affecting and related to the fragment area. Group size in small fragment highly variable due to non-dispersal males. No fission happening. Birth rate, growth rate are low in small degraded fragment. And percentage immatures in group decreased in maybe due to low survival weaning. Group in small fragments spend less time like that. So high stress level we found, genetic variability. Overall, we find a decline in population many forest patches. How this translating into this one? So we also recommended to the state government, what can be done, how you can restore the population, especially this kind of forest patches. That one of the things was human settlements should be moved. I don't think it is possible nowadays because a lot of other issues involved. Otherwise, there are places one can really possible to make some forest patches where human settlement can be avoided. And stricter control of human presence, especially people go inside the forest patch, fuel collection, illegal timber extraction kind of thing, and a lot of livestock going on, and vehicle movement of people need to be controlled. Especially there are many people leave their domestic animal to the forest patches, that 100% to be controlled. So many other So many other recommendations we made to the government. Feeding wildlife, many times people go to forest patch, they basically feed, I never see lentil macaw, they feed them. While feeding them, they are also feeding their parasite. There are you have a lot of, you carry a lot of parasites, especially gastrointestinal parasite, you feed them. So that's why one can easily transmit this parasite to the wild animal, especially Putotam, Malia Dam, Topsail. You find people feeding the wild monkeys. Basically, you are infecting them most than helping them animal. And there are several streams are shared between human settlement forest patches. And this is another interesting factor where how the both human, cattle, wild animal share this water. But unfortunately, there are some sewage also mixing there that make animal more susceptible to the survival of these forest patches. Heavy vehicular traffic is another interesting observation we made, because many times you find in Putotam, Anteparesola, Yerpadi forest patches where you find road kills of lentil macaw. So there are high speed vehicle go and hit the animal when they're crossing like that. So not only that, we need to actually also help regenerate, especially connecting the neighboring forest patches. That was one recommendation. My colleague Divya and other people, NCF, they are working on to connecting the forest patches so that an animal gene flow is possible between forest patches, connecting two forest patches by food trees between two forest patches. It is possible that they are working on. That's another interesting recommendation that people are working on that can help so that gene flow and population movement between forest patches can help them. And the other, you want need to study long term, consistent monitoring over a period of time, how the disturbance, demography changes. Is there any population have enough female, male there to survive over a period of time? That can be studied. That can be student. Awareness program is another. It's not least, but it's one of the recommendation which I made to help them. So with this, I came to the final acknowledgement where my colleagues, senior colleagues, and my PhD supervisor Ajit Kumar Mehava Singh, my colleague Ajay Gaur, Kumara, Srinivasa Murthy, they all helped in various ways studying, especially Dr. Ajay Gaur helped in studying in genetics, Kumara helped in collecting samples, Srinivasa Murthy helped in studying parasite load on animals. And I also got a grant from DBT, DST, CSAR, Central Authority, acknowledged here. And I also got permission from Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka Forest Department to work on. And interestingly, the researchers who directly involved in the project are Dr. Ram, worked as is for PhD. Vinod worked on stress and other work, and Tiwari and Reddy, they worked almost extensively 3 years in the field, and these two people also worked on parasite project, and Hussain, who worked on understanding the behavioral ecology of the species. So these are all people directly involved in the project to understand how a species go extinction. I saying thank you to all of you listening to my talk. It's not least this slide is a very interesting slide where a lantern macaw tried to jump between forest patch and Antiparesola where the road cut across a forest patch. Uh, Almost at 7 to 10 feet actually wide, and has to jump. So if any failure in jump is fatal for the survival. Hope that will really not exist in future. Government, other people really try to solve the problem. Hope we'll understand more and more science to save the species from extinction. With this, I thank all
Yeah.
of you. I end up here asking any clarification or questions related to that.
Thank you, Dr. Umapati. Amidst your, you in such a short notice, you
Yeah.
accepted an invitation, and you could share your experience and present your research. Thanks a lot for joining with us. And I now request the participants, if at all they have any questions, maybe they can use the chat box, or one at a time can unmute their audio and then ask the questions if they.
Yeah, thank you, Mohan. I'm not able to talk to you that time, so I thank you for arranging this meeting and opportunity sharing our work. It's quite one of the longest ever study of any species in India. Almost 25 years you are working on and continue to work on this species. And more and more will reveal how the species go extinct, what are the processes go in future. Thank you.
That's really interesting that you have been working on this particular habitat fragmentation for the last 20 years, and and at the end, perhaps you could give some inputs to the government also in terms of planning and policy changes. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
And I think I can begin with a small, what just came to my mind.
Yeah.
Do you think the natural fragmentation, if at all it is there, in any ways, do you think it has some positive effect on not necessarily the lion-tailed macaque, but any other species? Do you think that some sort of fragmentation will have some specific positive influence to as a large in a larger perspective?
Yeah, definitely, because that helps the animal to adapt and evolve. When the resources are restricted, animal move and change food habits and other behavioral aspect. Accordingly, speciation happen like that. So when you have restricted environment, animal try to live in different resource of food. So the frugivore become herbivore, frugivore become folivore, folivore become something else like that. So they helps to evolve over a period of time. But you have that takes thousands of years. Whereas what artificial way of doing here now, human interference, habitat fragmentation, they forced to live, change their behavioral change within 30, 40 years. That's difficult to adapt themselves. If it happen naturally, animal adapt, become, they survive better. But now what we are doing is a short period of time, we are not giving enough time to evolve.
Okay. So from the audience side, maybe they can unmute their audio, and if they want, they can ask some questions to Dr. Umapati. I think he would be happy to answer. Umapati, I'll read out a question for you. There is a question. Sir, will soil composition and level of oxygen in the forest fragments will affect the species population?
Definitely, because I mentioned to you previously when the forest is opened up, there is a sunlight influx is very high, and accordingly the nutrition cycle is going to change. That's going to affect entire microfauna of the soil. So definitely, the rainforest is always wet and humid and hot in the rainforest. Whereas when the forest patch is opened up, that's going to change. When you change more sunlight, this humidity will going to change, and their soil microbiota are going to change. Accordingly, all those going to change. So this, as I mentioned to you, the long-term effect on the habitat. Definitely, yeah.
Okay. So do you think any other species other than lion-tailed macaque in great threat or in the verge of extinction or anything else particularly in the Western Ghats?
Many species. One species we already gone extinct is Malabar civet. Malabar civet, which is not sighted after 1998, I think so. So already gone extinct. There are species which is nocturnal animal like Truvangor flying squirrel. Rarely will find now. There are many species which are really many frog species, Nurans, many frog species which are all under severe threat because of this exposure of to the new environment, the habitat changes over a period of time.
And also, do you think the climate change will accelerate this habitat fragmentation, or is there any relationship between the climate change and then fragmentation?
Yeah. My study during 1984, I collected water rainfall pattern. Neerar in Valparai, one of the area in southern India, where highest rainfall almost 6,500 per year rainfall happened. That is yearly in 1890s by Britisher. When I was studying almost 100 years, exile 100 years after, it become 3,300 plus something like that. So you have almost 50% of rainfall happen over a period of time. That also have climate change. That associated with forest cover, environment, more exposure, more draft now you can find. Those time there are 6 months rainfall, now only 3 months rainfall. So that climate change is happening there, especially Western Ghats. That going to come in very soon, and it's going to affect directly, indirectly, all of us.
Thank you very much. Dr. Mohammadi, there is a question from another participant. How is the sample collected for the estimation of stress level? How does the differentiation of male and female fecal samples are done on macaques?
So we follow the manual carefully. Most of the animals are habituated groups, and we meticulously follow over a period of time. Then we know each individual male, female, and collect fecal sample and preserve them, and bring to a lab and extract them. So we know what species, what individual that the fecal matter we collect from them. So it's easy to do it, but it takes some time to understand this one.
How CCMB is? What is the focus of CCMB in this particular area of research? Species conservation. Species conservation.
CCMB actually working on other aspect where by developing various biotechnology tools, especially reproductive and genetic tools we are developing, and helping them both in situ ex situ conservations. Especially we help the many zoos in India how one can breed them effectively, and we also help them understanding how animal healthiness, especially reproductively, genetically, disease-wise in situ places like in zoo, like in many national parks and sanctuaries, tiger reserves. So we help directly the forest department to understand their issues and help them, advise them. So not only that, we also helped Hyderabad Zoo to breed endangered species mouse deer successfully from 6 individual to almost 260 individuals. So that level we go from captive breeding to highest level of genetic interference. So all the level we help are doing now.
Okay. But do you think that you can reintroduce the species, whichever is in the extinction, by developing from the in situ? Do you think that it will help the reintroduction?
Many species actually globally have been after successfully bred in captivity and released in the wild. It's possible, and because if you have habitat, like for example, Great bustard, although we have habitat, but we are losing the species for many reasons. So there are programs going on by Government of India and Rajasthan and WA involved. We also like to start a program in South India where we help them to breed them. So once you breed them, still you have enough habitat to be able to survive. Definitely we can really release them and give them protection so that they can survive. So there are many examples globally. There are 14 species, 14 to 17 species have been successfully reintroduced after a successful breeding program.
So for that, you may need to suggest. I mean, are you suggesting more increase in forest patch if you suddenly reintroduce a species which
protection.
is of less,
especially for protection, we want to give more protection, more management. What made animal gone extinction? What made animal decline population? That need to be rectified.
Okay. Okay, so there is again, I think one more comment. Please comment on the effect of biodiversity due to habitat. I mean, you have been focusing on one particular species, but there is a question: what about the biodiversity due to habitat fragmentation?
Definitely, this is a model. We just want to examine how a species undergo. This is the same applicable all the species, whether it is many species, especially amphibians, reptiles, many bird species are getting affected because more and more human interference in their natural habitat have lost many species. Their range has been restricted, so they live in smaller home ranges, smaller habitat like that. So it has severe impact. As I mentioned to you, 50% of species going extinct because of habitat fragmentation. I mentioned to you in the one of my slides that 50% of species facing threat because of habitat fragmentation. That means you think about how severity the fragmentation influencing the survival of species globally, not only India.
And even the monoculture is also can be related to the fragmentation.
And monoculture is a useless habitat in the natural environment. So it may not serve any purpose other than fuel wood or something like that. They planted now. Government of India, government of Tamil Nadu, other government now started removing it, especially eucalyptus and other places. Initially, they thought they're planting for some other purpose. Now it has no purpose.
Okay. Sir, Dr. Uma, with another one, how does a species get affected by habitat fragmentation urban ecosystem? Do you think there is a fragmentation urban ecosystem?
It's not a fragmentation, but isolation. See, there are many birds, especially for birds, they survive in urban. You can't directly relate to habitat fragmentation, but many urban trees have been removed for activities like building big apartments and industrial infrastructure. So if you remove a tree, and there are many species, like one of the example is like our sparrow. Sparrow gone almost extinct most of cities because of you lose all vegetation cover. So that is a direct impact on the many species. Then you have a sparrow, there are pigeon comes, that pigeon does not require a tree. So you have other species, invasive species. The nature species go extinct because sparrows feed on insects, other naturally occurring system there. Whereas pigeon don't eat anything on naturally controlling any local insect like that. So once natural species go extinct, alien species, invasive species occupy the space like pigeon. It has definitely detrimental on the system.
Can we suggest for urban forestry?
Definitely, of course.
And if we can demarcate a land, for example, uh, in a city, if you isolate a land for a percentage of land, certain percentage of land, will it have some positive effect on biodiversity and on overall level, wealth of the natural ecosystem? Can we reclaim or restore? Is there any possibility of restoring the
Of
to
course,
some extent?
definitely, of course. You build a forest, a hectare or a square kilometer. Within 10 years of time, you find all kind of birds, animals come back there, and it also serves as a carbon restoring carbons, natural
Okay.
carbons. So that definitely helps. That is the government of India recently, a few months ago, they initiated a program called urban forestry. So
Okay.
they're going to go big way in city level where small area can be planted, all kind of natural forest, so that can attract natural species, so that to help reabsorbing CO2.
Okay, sir. And one other participant is asking another, is there any other, are there any research group working on Western Ghat fishes? Because you have mentioned there are 165 species.
Yeah, there are many species working. Persons are working. Rajiv Raghavan from Kerala Fisher Research is working. Mani Megalan from Bharatiya University is working. And many people are working in Western Ghats fisheries. Yeah.
So I think maybe I think we can conclude with this, Dr. Abdi. If there are no more questions, we can conclude with this. And once again, I thank Dr. Umapati and very much for accepting our invitation to deliver a lecture in our webinar series. Thank you very much. And I thank all the participants for their active interaction and cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Umapati.
And thank
And
you,
I think
Professor Mohan.
we
Thank you
can
so much. I'm happy to share my work and other things. Thank you so much.
okay, thank you. I think we can conclude this session. Thank you
Yeah,
all. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.